Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chapter 16 Goal Setting lecture. This will be a pretty quick chapter. I'm going to run through this as quick as possible. Goal setting is probably the most common technique used by athletes, coaches, trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, sports psychologists, pretty much everybody. And it's also the most misused skill, right? So it's really easy to teach and anyone can teach and really understand it, but it's also one that's misused the most. We'll talk a little bit about how and why it's misused as we go along into this lecture. All right, so first start with goals and what they are. Here is your official definition, basically a standard that you hope to attain, and goal setting is the skill that you use to enhance your performance. Now, there are two types of goals. The first being subjective. This type of goal is basically not very measurable. Just general goals like I want to get better, I want to get healthier. Exercisers who might want to lose weight might just say that they want to feel better. So those are subjective goals. Now, an objective goal is a lot more specific. These are goals that you can measure, typically need to be done in a certain time frame. And so objective basically means that it's measurable by some sort of standard. So, for example, again, with the weight loss, an objective goal would be, I want to lose 30 pounds by the summer. And then on the opposite end of that is a subjective goal where you say, I want to look better, I want to feel better, things like that. Those are subjective. When we talk about goal setting, we are going to emphasize the objective side of, or the objective type of goals. Within the objective goals, we can break those down into three types of objective goals. And as you see here, they are outcome, performance, or process goals. And we'll go through each one of these specifically. So the first type of objective goal are called outcome goals. And this is the more big picture type goals. It focuses on pretty much all the time the results of a contest between opponents or teams. So it's an outcome goal is the big picture, like I want to win the conference, right? Or I want to go to the NCAA championships, things like that. Really focusing on the result of what you want to do. These goals usually depend on the performer or some sort of other external variables, right? So your opponent, whether they're strong or weak, weather, etc. And so in a sense, that makes outcome goals a lot more difficult to achieve. If one focuses on just an outcome goal, because it's more of a long-term goal and one that's sometimes out of your control, it can be very discouraging to just focus on outcome goals. And that's why we, when doing goal setting, should also create performance goals. Now, performance goals focus on improvements that are relative to one's own past performance, increasing your long jump distance, increasing your kicking accuracy, increasing your field goal percentage, things like that. They are based on your own past performance. So again, you're disregarding any sort of opponent and working more on your own performance instead. And so these are more flexible and obviously within your own personal control, such as improving a personal best when you're running. And so these are more achievable in a sense because, again, it's within your control and you are able to, if you put in enough effort and work towards it, you're likely to achieve these more often. And then going even a step further than that is a process goal. So process goals focus on specific behaviors that someone must do in order to achieve that performance goal, right? So going back to that example, let's say my goal is to improve my personal best when running a half marathon. And so process goals would include the smaller steps that I have to do in order to achieve that performance goal. And so maybe that is building up my endurance. And so my process goal would be to make sure that I am running 5 to 10 miles 3 to 5 times a week. right? And so examples here include sort of the smaller things that athletes must do in order to better their performance, right? So tennis player needing to keep their feet moving even if they're tired, volleyball athletes squaring up properly to the net and using strong hands when blocking. So again, these are very, very specific type actions that you need to do in order to increase the likelihood of achieving their performance and thus their outcome goals. And so when it comes to behavior change, it's important to know when to use the different types of goals. Performance and process goals are particularly useful before or during competition. Because they are more specific, athletes are putting more focus on themselves and what they need to do rather than their opponent or what's happening around them. And too much focus on specific performance goals can create anxiety, but it's a lot less likely to happen than someone who just focuses on their outcome goals. If someone's just focused on beating their opponent, winning the competition, they may be too focused on that aspect and unable to really be in the present and focus on what they need to do when they're too worried about what's going to happen in the future or the result of what's going to happen. So is goal setting effective? Yes. There's research that says that setting goals are a lot more effective than not setting goals. Having direction in terms of what you want to achieve are important elements of this skill. It allows performers to really mobilize and focus on what they need to do more specifically. And having a goal tends to prolong performers' persistence and their motivation to want to continue to improve. So here are some ideas for how to incorporate the 3 types of objective goals. Again, outcome goals should not be used specifically while in competition, as it can increase anxiety, but it can help individuals maintain motivation. So having your outcome goals written in front of you when you wake up every morning can be really motivating, but it's important not to focus on that right before a competition, as it, again, does increase one's anxiety. Performance and process goals, however, can be more used closer to competition. It refocuses the importance on the individual specific performance and not the opponent. These goals can be adjusted to fit the individual. So if something's not working, if something's getting in the way, and you need to slightly tweak your performance or process goals, that is perfectly okay. Okay, I'm gonna skip over the research. There's a lot of research that's been done on goal setting. I will quickly like to mention the major goal barriers. In the research, it was specifically for Olympians, but I find this to also be very truthful for pretty much anyone who sets goals and sees and finds it difficult to try to achieve them, right? So why is that? Some of them listed here include lack of confidence, lack of goal feedback, so not adjusting or not setting more challenging goals or too challenging of goals, and not being able to adjust. Having too many goals or conflicting goals, a lack of time, work commitments, and family and personal relationships. So those are all very, very common, which is why it's important for people to revisit goals. Oftentimes people just make a goal and not track progress towards it, and it's often difficult to keep one accountable for the goals. Another thing that's common is that people don't write down their goals. They keep it in their head. Often if you don't write them down, you forget about them. And so it's important to also write these down and post them somewhere so that you are constantly keeping track of your progress. And so why does goal setting work? Goal setting works due to 2 things, 2 different views. This first one is called indirect thought process view, and it says that goals lead to changes in psychological factors such as confidence and anxiety. When one makes goals and is able to achieve goals, it's able to improve people's confidence in that indirect way. And so that influences performance. Similarly, those who like to set goals demonstrate less anxiety, which we've talked about before. And all these things can influence performance. And we see that in this Burton 1989 research among swimmers. The other view is called direct mechanistic view. Really what this is saying is that goal setting allows performers to direct their attention to the most important elements of a skill, right? They're able to put all of their efforts into this one thing that they need to achieve. And knowing that they have this goal, this thing to achieve, also prolongs their persistence, and they're more willing to learn new strategies for how to achieve those goals. So that is the direct mechanistic view. And here we have components of effective goals, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard or practiced creating SMART goals. This isn't my favorite way of explaining goals, but it works for some. And so for those who don't remember, SMART stands for specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timed goals. And so all these, if you have all these components in your goal, then they are more likely to be more effective for producing that behavior change that you want to do. Again, this isn't my favorite way of explaining goals. I like to use the outcome, performance, and process goals when I'm explaining goal setting to my athletes. But this is one that's, again, very commonly used, to each their own. And so here are some examples of improperly and properly written goals, specifically for a tennis player, right? So goal type, we have process here. A bad one, a poorly written one is to improve tennis backstroke technique. Again, for process goals, you want to be very, very specific. So how are you going to improve your backstroke? The rewritten and improved goals is executing a backstroke with a firm wrist and with an elbow pointed down. So again, very mechanical, something very tangible that you can remember and focus on in order to achieve your goal. Here's an example of a performance goal. So improving your first serve effectiveness. What exactly does that entail? I don't know. That is why it is poorly written. And so to rewrite it and to improve it, one says during competition, serve no less and no more than 60% of first serves into the court by the end of the third tournament. So that is very, very specific, right? They will be able to keep track of that particular standard. And at the end of the third tournament, they'll be able to say, did I reach my performance goal? And then lastly, an example of an outcome goal, improve win-loss percentage over the previous year. It's not too bad, but to rewrite and improve it, they put maintaining number 2 ranking on the team and win 5 of 7 dual meet matches prior to playoffs. As you can see, poorly written goals are when they are not specific enough. The more specific you can be and the more measurable components you put in it, the better your goal is. And the better it is, you'll be able to see if you've achieved it or not. So here are all the principles of effective goal setting. Again, not going to go over it here. I believe they do a really good job in your book of talking about some of these. So another thing that I quickly want to talk about is this idea of mastery approach versus performance avoidance goals. And really what this is saying is that you want to think about how you are wording your goals, and you want to make sure that they are worded positively, right? That you're saying, I would like to do this, as opposed to, I don't want to do this. If we look here, the mastery approach, again, mastery, talking about your own skill and your own improvement of your skill, right? Improving my time in a mile by 5 seconds versus the mastery avoidance, where you don't run the miles slower than you did last time. You want to focus on the positive approach to that, right? The positive wording, improving my time. And same thing with performance approach. This one's talking about finishing in the top 10 of the race, which is a pretty good goal, as opposed to saying don't finish in the bottom half of the field, which is taking that more negative approach. So make sure the way you word your goals is in that approaching side. And there's research that backs this up that says, yes, mastery approach is the way you want to go. It's important that you avoid goals that focus on failing, not losing, or not performing well in comparison to others. So any of those avoidance type goals is not recommended. Here are some suggestions for how to do goal setting with a team or a group. These are good for coaches who maybe have a hard time setting effective goals for their group or their team, right? So following these steps can be really helpful. I'm going to skip through these strategies. There's not much here that you really need for the test, but can be helpful for those of you who want to learn more. Here are the common problems in goal setting. Oftentimes people think that individuals set goals, and so there's no need to really bring it up to them. It's also really difficult to convince individuals to set goals. Again, setting too many goals too soon can be frustrating and difficult to just keep track of. Failing to set specific goals, specific performance and process goals can cause people to lose confidence, feel discouraged, and too focused on the big picture rather than smaller goals that they can achieve more frequently. Failing to evaluate or modify goals, and underestimating time available for goals. So making sure that you have the perspective for how long it actually takes to achieve goals, especially outcome goals. And it's a process. A lot of time you'll need to adjust and reevaluate your goals in order to make sure that you continue to move up in what you're trying to achieve. And so that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining me. Hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you next week.